said, and I forget what the topic was, but I said, geez, I hope I get this right. This is a little complicated. And she said, well, I know Ed Inghrim is going to be a presenter, and he'll be in the session. And if you have any questions about anything, Ed could stand up and take it straight, because he's an expert. And this is a quote from the business manager of a district that Ed's not even in. And she also said that she reads Ed's letters to the editor, and she finds them very informative and well written. So, Ed, you got a fan in the business manager up in Nazareth, and in me too. So
Ed, I got two fans.
You got two fans
at least. I'm a fan too.
Do you want to stand up here, Ed?
No, yeah, fine. I also need somebody to operate. Do you have a remote?
I do here. Just press this.
Yeah, then it'll take it. Press
the right hand. Okay. Terrific. Okay, thank you, Ed.
My name's Ed Inghrim. I'm a director on the Saucon Valley School Board. And about 7 years ago, on a Sunday afternoon, I got a phone call from someone that I didn't know, but they had just read an opinion piece that I had submitted to the Morning Call, because I like to express my opinion. And she said to me, I read your article, that was entitled, "It's Not the Taxes, Stupid." Sorry about that. Can you hear me? Okay. She said, it's not the article was entitled, "It's Not the Taxes, It's the Spending." She said, would you run for the school board? And this was a Sunday afternoon, and I thought about it, and I said, well, my mother always said that rather than complain about something, you ought to try to fix it. And so I said, sure. And she said, well, we have a bit of a problem because the deadline for filing is tomorrow. So we have to run around and get signatures, and hopefully you'll cross-file. So we need 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats. And I said, well, I don't know any Democrats. And she said, it's okay, I know a few Democrats. Anyway, so I cross-filed, and I ran on a ticket with a bunch of other people that said, we need to stop spending in Saucon Valley. It's out of control. We had the highest tax rate in the county, and we won. And I'm pleased to announce that after 6 years on the board, we've had 4 years without a tax increase. Wow. So it can be done. Okay. Now this is a boring subject that is contracts, school contracts. And the problem that we have is that there are 500 public school districts and there are 500 unique contracts. There is no such thing as a standard contract. They lack uniformity in format, content, detail, size, and etc. And the other thing I've learned is that old contracts never die. They just live on. Now, in order to understand the PA school contract, you need to understand the negotiation process and who sits at the bargaining table. Now, in addition to the local bargaining unit, as Simon had mentioned, there are representatives from the PSEA who sit there, and they provide legal, financial, and technical support to the local teachers union. And the PSEA staff is over 350 people. So there's a lot of power sitting at the other side of the table. When you look at the school district, there's a business manager and there's a lawyer. And sometimes you may have an administrator and from 0 to 3 or 4 school board directors who basically know nothing about finances or bargaining. And I know I was one of them. Okay, the PSEA collects about $24 million per year in union dues and is a heavy contributor, as Simon said, to the political process. And in fact, in 2010, they spent over $600,000 trying to get Dan elected. Okay, and as Simon said, I'm going to repeat an awful lot of stuff that Simon has already said. Remember the game Simon says? Okay, the PSEA strategy is to basically pit the schools against each other. Okay, that school there pays more money. That school has better health benefits, so on and so forth. And I tell you, after a while, it kind of works on you. Okay, the contract negotiation process is also pressured by the threat of strikes, as Simon said. And Pennsylvania, by the way, leads the nation in strikes. And Saucon Valley is probably one of the top schools for strikes. The contract process is heavily weighted against the school boards because we get pressure from the parents because they're very vocal. When the school goes out on strike, they have issues like daycare, pay, so on and so forth. And the arbitration process, as Simon already said, works against us. I've been involved in arbitration. I was on the negotiation committee 6 years ago. And every time we went into arbitration, we lost. Okay, now if there was a generic contract, it would look like this, and I will go over the individual items. Okay, the first thing you have is a preamble, and basically it's a statement of either the school district's mission or a recognition of the union to represent the people in the district. There's also a statement defining the duration of the contract. There's a boilerplate statement, and I don't know why it's in there, that says we won't walk about, and they won't strike while we have a contract. Then there is this insidious section of the contract which talks about wages, and I'm going to spend a lot of the time talking about wages. Okay? And typically wages are discussed in contracts in terms of a salary schedule. Now, there's a wide variation in salary schedules and pay scales across the state, and there's also a lot of variation in who controls the allocation of those dollars. Okay, some districts will basically approve a total pot of dollars and allow the union to basically fill in the matrix, in the salary schedule. There are other school districts like Saucon Valley where the board controls the number of dollars in the matrix, and we took 2 strikes last time in order to be able to take over the control of the salary matrix. This is what it looks like. It's a bunch of columns and a bunch of rows. Saucon Valley happens to have 14 rows and 10 columns. And each one of those cells in the matrix is filled with a number that represents the salary that will be paid to a teacher, whose background, maps a row and a column. Now, this basically represents the 17 schools in Lehigh Valley. And if you'll notice that Saucon Valley is #1 in terms of the amount of money that we pay. And in fact, Simon happened to mention the top on their salary grid is $98,000. Well, Saucon Valley is $93,000. Okay, so we're not far behind, Bucks County. All right? You'll also notice that there's another school district which I've identified with the yellow in the grid there, which is Easton. And I think we're all familiar with the problems that Easton has been having. And it was a result of the contract that they basically approved 5 years ago. And when I saw that contract, I actually went to my superintendent and I said, Easton cannot afford this contract. I don't know if they know what they signed. Okay, now the union goal in every bargaining session is to minimize the number of steps and to maximize the number of columns. And in fact, the last time we were negotiating, one of the union members said to me, we only need 5 steps. Because if I don't learn my job in 5 years, I'll never learn it. And I said, well, that's okay, that's fine. Then let's get rid of all the columns. We don't need any columns, we just have 5 steps. Well, they didn't like that idea. Okay, now the union perception of bargaining salaries is there's an account object code 121 that represents professional salaries in every school district. And they view that as their money, their pot of gold. And in bargaining, what they want is that pot to grow every year. In their mind, that's what bargaining is all about. Grow that money and put us in charge of that money. Now, as an example, there was a recent settlement, wasn't a settlement, they haven't settled, and there was a report that was published in the Pennsylvania Labor Relations Board website, and it was a notice of fact-finding report, and it was released on April 13th. And this basically tracks what I showed earlier with the pot of gold. The association basically was demanding that that pot of gold grow every year, starting with 15,835,000 and then eventually growing to 18,455. Now, unfortunately, the school board didn't quite agree with the numbers in the gold, in the pot of gold. Now, from my perspective, this is the problem that Pennsylvania has in terms of how we compensate teachers. It has created a huge problem for us, and school boards need to move away from this concept of let's just identify the number of dollars in a pot, in that pot, and let's start administering salaries. So if I had my way, and of course I don't, I'd get rid of that whole concept. Okay, now we all are familiar with the Texas two-step, which is a dance. Well, we in Pennsylvania have what I call the NEA PSEA three-step, okay? And basically, and Simon's already said this, there are three components in a teacher's salary increase. There's the cost of living. And the cost of living theoretically is supposed to reflect inflation. Then there's a step increase. That is, a teacher, when you look at that grid, will move from one step to another step. And then, of course, there's a column increase, which he calls lanes, because he comes from the UK. And the column increase basically is designed to reflect continuing education. So as teachers continue their graduate study effort, you know, when they reach a certain milestone, depending on the school, they will move, as Simon said, a lane, okay? But when you hear basically about the settlement of a contract, they don't really define those three steps. In some schools, they'll just release the cost of living. Other schools, like Saucon Valley, we actually announced our raises.
Can I just
Sure.
question? The column that you're talking about, that you're referring to as lanes, are those, is that mandatory continuing education?
No, it's not.
It's not.
And in fact, it's something that the NEA and the PSEA and all of its compatriots have foisted on school boards over the years, and I'll get into that. As far as I'm concerned, it's simply a way of artificially boosting their salaries with very little, if any, return for the investment in the school.
Must they stick within the discipline that they teach?
It depends on the school district.
Can they take administrative courses?
When I first got to Saucon Valley, there were many teachers that were doing that. And in fact, we have, our last column is an M60, which basically is equivalent to a PhD. It says I have a master's degree plus 60 additional graduate level credits. We don't have a PhD on our staff right now. And in fact, we don't have, most of our teachers don't even have a master's. You know, they basically have accumulated credits that have little, if anything, to do with their specialty, their field. Now, we have tended to eliminate that in Saucon Valley, but a lot of school boards, you know, continue to allow that. It all really depends on the contract and the administration within the school. Now, as I said earlier, with this raise announcement, I think in many cases the union doesn't want the public to really know what their salaries are, and school boards are in many cases ashamed to actually admit what the increases are. Okay, now the first step, which is the COLA, basically says that for every cell in that matrix, when you advance to the new contract, the value in that cell will increase. Now, the only people that get stuck in a cell, as Simon's already said, is the people on the last row, row 14 in the case of Saucon Valley. So they will get a 2% raise. Everyone else will advance one step depending on the number of years of service that they have. So in Saucon Valley, we basically have 14 rows, and the top row represents the 14th year of service. Okay? So as you can see, as they advance, wow. Okay. Now, over the years, the NEA, the PSEA has convinced local school boards that continuing the teachers' graduate level education can result in better performance in the classroom. That's what I heard when I sat across the bargaining table from the union. They said, continuing education makes us a more valuable teacher in the classroom. Now, in concert with that philosophy, that teachers, as they improve their level of education, are more efficient in the classroom, there is the opposite view, and that is that no matter what that degree is in, whether it's in phys ed or whether it's a high school advanced physics instructor, they're all going to get the same compensation. There is no variation in terms of the value or the market value of that particular school, that particular skill set. Now, there have been many studies on this issue of does continuing education actually improve teachers' performance in the classroom? And the answer, sadly enough, is it really doesn't. Okay? But it's great if you're a teacher and you want to get an increase in your salary. Now, this is an example of the kinds of graduate study courses that our teachers are taking in Saucon Valley. And I know that you can't basically read that from the back of the room, but there's a course such as A Path to Freedom, which basically is worth 3 credits, and eventually it's going to allow a teacher to move a column. There's another course that says using print media to support education. None of these courses, by the way, will lead to a certificate that a teacher can hang on the wall that says, I now have a master's degree or I have a PhD. And in fact, most of these courses the teachers take on the web. So they don't even have to go to a brick and mortar school. Okay, and as I said, as a result of that in Saucon Valley, we have many teachers at a master's plus 60, and they don't even have 1 master's. Okay, so the last step basically is continuing education, and as they move across, as Simon said, lanes, they will get an increase in salary. Okay, so here is an example of a Saucon Valley teacher, okay, who in 10-11 was making $68,920. Well, that cell in 11-12 went up to $70,446, or 2.2%. But the teacher didn't stay there because they were going to move a step. So moving to the next step basically said their raise was $3,704, or 5.38%. But that teacher was continuing their education, so they moved over a couple of lanes. So the raise last year for this teacher, while many of us saw no increase in salary, and many people have been losing their jobs, this teacher got a 12% raise. Not bad. Okay, this basically is a view of the Saucon Valley salary schedule when I ran for the board and eventually became a member of the negotiating committee. And as you can see, the percentages sort of varied, and they varied from a low of 3.1% to a high of 7.19%. Now, I'm an engineer, and I look at something like this and say, this is not natural. There's something wrong here. Why is one step increase different than another step increase? So one of the objectives that we had in the negotiation with the union was to fix it. So we fixed it, and this is what our salary grid looks like now for 2011-2012. This is the way an engineer and God would make a salary grid. Now there's another school district that is east of us. It sits on the Delaware River there. This is what their salary schedule looks like. Now notice this one particular 24.2% increase in salary. I'll bet you there was somebody on that negotiating committee on the union that decided he was going to basically establish the values in that grid. And that, by the way, is very common. This non-normalized schedule, it's used throughout most school districts. And you can see there's a direct relationship between who sits on the negotiating committee and the value in those cells. Okay, as Simon said earlier, when they basically released to the press the results of their negotiation, they publish a number. So Saucon Valley, for example, when we released our information to the press, we said we were going to start with a low of 3.5%, and eventually, in the last year of the contract, the average raise would be 3.8%. But this is what really happened. This scatter plot represents real employees and their average increase in salary over the 4 years. So we've had some teachers, like this one particular teacher here, over the 4-year contract, has seen their salary go up 30% a year.
This is annual.
Per year. The average was 6.9%. Now that's reality. No school board really would release that information 5 years ago. When I got on the school board, the first thing I did was get the salaries of the teachers and develop this kind of an analysis. And when they started telling us we were only getting 3% raises or whatever it is, I would just show them the scatter plot. Okay, the other major cost item is benefits, and this represents, the view of the benefits as far as Saucon Valley is concerned. And as you can see, by 2015-16, our cost of benefits is going to go up actually over $4 million, and the driver behind that is PESers. And, we'll talk about PESers later. But about 20%, 28% of the cost that a school district incurs is because of the benefits that the employees receive.
And that $4 million represents 10% of our total budget. So that's sometimes you don't get a perspective of the.
You're right.
The dollars. You say $4 million, and
yeah, Saucon Valley is a small.
Yeah, they that's not much. Well, yeah, it's 10% of our budget, so that's a big chunk.
Now, this basically is a list of the benefits that Saucon Valley and every other school district offers. For example, we offer a retirement incentive. It's not a retirement incentive. Nobody in Saucon Valley retires because of the retirement incentive. People in Saucon Valley retire when the numbers work out in PESers. Oh, I'm now eligible for full PESers benefits in terms of my retirement check. Then they submit their retirement proposal, and we have to hand out money. In this particular case, with the last round of retirees, taxpayers are going to shell out almost, $500,000 just because these people retired. And on top of that, we have to buy out their sick days. Okay? How many people in the private industry get their sick days bought out? We don't even get any sick days. Okay? And there's also the implicit benefits, which are basically Social Security and PESers. And PESers is the 800-pound gorilla that all school districts face. Okay, then there's health care. And compared to the private industries, public employees have wonderful health care benefits. As you can see, they pay next to nothing. We fought long and hard in the last contract negotiation round just to get them to pay $95 a month for family coverage. Prior to that, it was $30. And there are many school districts where the premium sharing is nothing. I keep repeating Simon. Simon covered this, okay? In every contract, there's very explicit language defining their work days as well as their work year. And any time you try to deviate from the terms of that contract, you got a grievance, and we have had grievances. We've had the administration try to sit down with the teachers and get 1 hour of their time that wasn't defined in the contract, and she could not do it. They refuse to basically budge. Then, of course, there's the work year, you know, which defines the number of days they work, and the calendar, as Simon said, you know, that calendar is very sacred to the teachers. Then there's a section in those contracts that talk about teachers' rights, just cause, evaluation, layoffs, and you can't lay anybody off. In fact, the only way that you can lay people off is to lie. So school districts lie, and the Pennsylvania Department of Education says, okay, you pretend you're doing it for this reason, and we'll pretend to approve it. And they do. So you basically cut programs. And once you cut the programs, you know, you can lay off the people. But you're not doing it for financial reasons. You're doing it because you change basically, you know, the programs that you offer to the students. Evaluation is a joke. Teachers have tenure. So, I mean, you can do all the evaluation you want, and it's a waste of time. But it's in the contract. And then, of course, if you find some teacher that you believe has committed some kind of ethical or some other violation, you know, there's the just cause process. And I tell you right now that every time we go through a grievance, we lose. This is an example of just cause. New York City, 3 out of 30,000 tenured teachers were dismissed for cause. Okay? In Chicago, between 2005 and 2008, 0.1% of the teachers were dismissed for cause. And 99% of tenured teachers are rated satisfactory. There are no poor teachers. Okay? And from my perspective, you know, a teacher is more likely to lose their job because they had sex with a student than they are for their performance in a classroom. Okay, I spoke about the grievance process, but the key here is we lose. We always lose. And the reason for it is the state's in charge of the grievance process. There are state employees that basically oversee this process. I keep repeating Simon. There is this issue of withdrawal of union dues, and it's in the contract. And it doesn't have to be in the contract. As Simon said, it's a negotiable item. But essentially what this does is it turns the power of taxation over to the union. Now, our business manager, when I first proposed that we not withdraw dues automatically, you know, he was shocked. He said, well, it doesn't cost us that much money. And I said, yeah, but it costs us a loss of power. We are giving our taxation power over to the union is what we're doing as a school board. And to make it worse, there's this thing called fair share, and we do have one teacher out of 189 that has not joined the union. But that poor guy has to pay 80% of the union dues. But he refuses, you know, to join the union, and has even walked across the picket line in the strike. And the union doesn't like him. He happens to be a math teacher. They don't like him at all. Okay? And in Saucon Valley, by the way, Simon said he didn't know what the dues were. Well, in Saucon Valley, it's $850 a year. So you take 186,000 employees, which is in the union, and multiply it times $850, you got a lot of cash. Over $24 million the PSEA has to play with. And they donate a lot of that to the politicians in Harrisburg. You know how much money we have in the school budget for political contributions? Zero. Okay, then there's all the appendices, and there you'll find everything but the kitchen sink, and there must be one out of the 500 school districts that got a kitchen sink in here. I haven't read them all. But I know that all the contracts are up on the web. You know, so if you're interested, you could go and look at them. That's it. Any questions?
I noticed on your chart at the end of your like a review of all their little benefits and causes. In addition to that, some free friends for teachers is substitutes. You know, there's nothing written there how many hours a day they have to spend at the school, bricks and mortar. And my friend she's my age, and so she can't get a permanent job, but she substitutes all the time. She's never without work. So there's a lot of that as well. I don't know, when they're out like that, do they use up their personal days or sick days, or are they just not there? Do you know how loose it goes, you know, rules?
Well, I'm not sure I can really answer that particular question. That's something I'd have to ask the administrator. I know that we have a number of teachers that have, you know, that have taken sabbaticals. They've taken leaves for medical reasons, personal reasons, and so on and so forth. And there are personal days that are in the contract, and they can use those personal days. They could also use their sick days, but they like to save their sick days because it's money, you know.
But yeah, I think don't they get 4 or 5
Personal days.
personal days?
Correct.
So they only work 180 days a year, and then they get 5 personal days, and I don't remember how many sick days.
I think there's either 2 or 3 sick days, but see, the roll the sick days over. You know, and in some schools, they actually allow them to roll personal days over into sick days. But I don't know why a school would do that, but there are some that do that.
Just 2 quick ones. The contract term, I don't know, 4 years sounds like a long time to me. Is that at a discretion, or is that something that's set? Can you just do it 1 or 2? Or?
Well, keep in mind, when we negotiated that contract, the economy was right at its peak and beginning to collapse. When we made an initial offer, our initial offer was 4.6%. When we saw what was happening to the contract, we actually withdrew our offer. And the union, by the way, took us to arbitration because they said you can't do that, but we did it, okay? And so we tried to squeeze the duration of the contract because of the uncertainty of the economy, but it was a bargaining session, and traditionally, Saucon Valley had 4- and 5-year contracts. I'm now heading up the contract negotiation for the upcoming contract because our contract expires in June, and I tell you right now, we're not looking at a 4-year contract. I think right now, the 2 is the maximum that we would agree to.
And the other thing is, when you do the step and the increase, I don't know if it would matter mathematically, I can't think off the top of it. Do you do an increase first and then the step, and then the step, and then the increase? Does it make a difference? How does that? Do they move up the step and then they get the increase on top of the step that they just moved into? Or do they get the increase first and then move up the step?
Well, I think mathematically it doesn't make any difference, does it?
I don't know, I kind of figured.
No, it doesn't really make any
I
difference.
wonder if does the COLA apply to the newer step, the higher step salary, or the
Oh,
lower
yeah,
step
yeah,
salary?
yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, the first thing they do is to apply a COLA to every cell in the matrix.
Then they do
And
the
then
step.
they do the step.
Right, correct,
That matters.
correct. Now, by the way, that's got to change. That has got to change, and I'm now looking at a proposal that says we're going to abandon salary schedule administration and take on the concept of salary administration. And it's a big difference, by the way, because right now, historically, every school expects a cell to increase year over year. And I'm saying that's got to stop. That's got to stop. You can give a person a raise as they move from one step to another step. And you could give them a very good raise. But you could also adjust the value of the cell they're moving into so it's less than the year before, or the same as the year before. And they could still get a good raise. I mean, as you saw there, we had a 5.4% automatic raise in Saucon Valley for our contract when they moved from one step to the next step. Our union is assuming that's frozen. And I'm saying, no. That 5.4 has got to go down. You know, so what it means is, you know, reestablishing values in that salary schedule year over year, but not necessarily driven by the value that was in that cell the year before. And if every school board in the state of Pennsylvania went down that path, we would solve the problem of runaway salaries.
How do you figure your COLA? Do you figure what's happened in the past, from the last COLA to this COLA, or do you try and get an idea of what it's, how much cost of living is going to go up in the future?
Well, you know, it's a crapshoot. I mean, you know, typically Pennsylvania will put out that capital index, you know, which some school districts view as, well, that's the COLA kind of a thing. It really depends on the people that are at the negotiating table.
I mean, anytime I've been involved in union contracts, thank God I'm not anymore, I'm retired, but our COLA was always based on, we got a COLA every 6 months, okay? Our COLA was based on, you know, what happened over the past 6 months. The cost of living went up, okay, so much, we got that same percentage of COLA. If it didn't go up, we just stayed the same, we got no increase.
Well, you know, you could go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and they'll give you a COLA. But they're lying. If the BLS is lying, because that COLA basically over years has evolved from what it used to be, which was looking at a basket of goods and then repricing that basket of goods year over year. But now they've taken some of the goods out of the basket. They've taken things like food, energy,
Well, yeah,
food.
People I work with COLA, we used to have five or six things. Housing was one, food costs, transportation costs. And all the way through the list, and they said, oh, well, we're going to take a couple things out of it. Well, mathematically, it's not really good taking things out of it, because then your base is based on less. So all one of those has to do is go out kilter, and it's going to throw off your COLA. The more things you have to base your COLA on, probably the better, the more control you're going to have over your COLA.
But every one of those items
goes out of kilter, the other ones can still affect.
But all of those items are reported by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You know, housing, so on and so forth.
But you got to work the COLA in the past. What happened? You can't. I can't see how they can negotiate and say, okay, this is going to be the COLA. In 6 months, you're going to get to. We don't know what's going to happen in 6 months.
Well, but you could always look at past trends, which is what we do. You know, we've looked at what has the COLA been.
But it should be totally based on past trends. What happened?
Well, you look at the economy that we're in today. Would you say we should base our COLA on what happened 5 years ago?
No, I'd say you should base it on what happened the last 6 months. And then you'll bring it up, then you'll adjust it again in another 6 months. If it went up 1%, fine. If it went down, well, they just stay the same the way they are.
Let's take, Paul, do you have a question, a different question? No offense, Tom, but I do want to get another question here.
Is tenure negotiable?
No. However, when you hire a new teacher, if you fire them before the 3rd year, they don't get tenure. Okay? Once they hit 3 years of 1 day, they now have tenure. So the administration does have an opportunity to basically tell the teacher you're not cutting it in the classroom, but it's basically, you know, before they get to the 3 years plus 1 day. At that point, it's automatic.
That's state law.
I don't know if it's state law.
Yeah.
in Jersey.
What's that?
Jersey's like that.
Yeah, I know. My son teaches in New Jersey.
Randy, you want to?
I want to ask Simon too, and I'll ask you. How long have you been with the board? 6 years?
6 years.
Good. What do you see coming up in the future? Is this getting better or is it getting worse? What do you see as far as contracts, negotiations, the conflict between the union and the teachers? What do you see?
Well, I'm speaking for myself. I think it's getting better, and the reason that it's getting better is because of the people here sitting in the room. There's a lot more residents of the various communities that are now taking an interest in what happens in the school board. You know, and I think that's having an effect across the state of Pennsylvania. I mean, we all know we're headed for a cliff. Saucon Valley in 4 years will be broke. We will run out of money.
Regardless of what happens?
Well, unless the people in Harrisburg, you know, grow up and recognize they have created a mess and are willing to stand up and
You really
fix
think
it.
they're gonna realize that?
What's that?
You really think Harrisburg is gonna realize?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Thank you very
You know,
much.
but I write opinion pieces in basically, you know, that express that point of view. I mean, we can't afford the pensions that we're offering, and where else could you have a pension fund where if it doesn't meet its expectations, you can reach into the taxpayer's pocket and make up for all the bad mistakes you've made?
If Salkin's going broke in 4 years, what do you think the other 16?
Oh, there are many school districts that are going to go before us.
Oh, okay.
Will they go broke because you can only raise taxes so much a year? I mean, you can always just raise taxes through the roof.
Well, you can. Over 40% of the people that live in rich Saucon Valley are living on Social Security. Okay? They're going to go broke. We'll drive them right out of their houses.
Two more questions, then we do got to move on.
One thing that I just found out, and it wasn't easy to find out, but get the duct tape, wrap it around your head. A teacher at 40 years gets 100% of their pay, because it's 2.5% a year in their retirement. It continues. We have a secretary who just celebrated her 50th year. Great lady, very nice. She's been a secretary in our school district for 50 years. She's 67. She started when she was 17. Fantastic, great. The day she retires, she'll get 125% of her pay. It keeps going up.
Okay, Garrett?
What about drug policies? Can you stipulate it, can you negotiate drug testing policies in a contract? I'm not trying to be provocative, it's a serious question.
No, the reason...
It was provocative.
The reason is serious, I don't know if you've read the paper, but this is a hot issue, and this is the man who's been on the forefront of that. That's I think why, you know, we're snickering a little bit, because this is in the paper, and you asked a good question to the right guy.
Yeah, in fact, at a school board meeting, I had actually recommended that we begin implementing a policy of random drug testing, at least within the student body. And all hell broke out. And in fact, eventually our lawyer has recommended to us that there is a case down in southern Pennsylvania that the ACLU is taking a school district to court on that very issue. So they recommended that we hold off and see what the court decides.
I was talking about the teachers.
No, I understand that. And that was one of the things that was going to be next on the drawing board, was testing of teachers. I personally am for it. I know when I moved from New Jersey to California, I retired and then took a job in California. The first thing I had to do was pee in a bottle for drug testing.
Yeah, exactly.
I worked at a Cadillac store in Florida for seasonal work, and every time I went back for the season, I had to do the same thing, and I said, what do you think I do when I go back to Pennsylvania for the summer?
Grow marijuana.
So what you're saying then is that is potentially a negotiable item?
Yeah.
in a
Oh,
teacher's
absolutely.
contract.
And in fact, I don't even think that's a negotiable item. That's a decision that the board needs to make in terms of board policy. So it's not a contract.
Policy thing, not a contract.
Absolutely.
Janice,
One
last
quick question. When a teacher is under observation for doing something wrong in the classroom, like at Allentown, we get quite a few, we are paying, as taxpayers, for that person to be at home or at a desk somewhere. Are you doing the same thing? And it goes about how long? How many years could that be to settlement? Either they're thrown out or back in class.
Yeah, I don't think there is a time limit. I mean, you saw the chart where I showed the New York. New York has a building where they have several thousand teachers that have been sitting for years, have not seen the inside of a classroom, collecting their salary.
Same benefits. Same
Right.
benefits.
Thank you very much.